Welcome to ICNC's interview with Professor Mazin Qumsiyeh on Palestinian nonviolent resistance and the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement. Professor Qumsiyeh is the author of Popular Resistance in Palestine and is also the founding director of the Palestine Museum of Natural History in Bethlehem. We began our interview with Professor Qumsiyeh by asking him, why did you write a book about Palestinian nonviolent resistance to Israel's policies of displacement, occupation, and discrimination?
Yes, it started when I was in the United States many years ago, and I wanted to speak about the Palestinian issue, and I was a speaker at universities and colleges and so forth. And a question that persistently came up because of the dominance in Western media, the mainstream media, which loves violence and loves blood and gore, the question that always came up, so when are you guys Palestinians going to have a Mahatma Gandhi or do some nonviolent resistance? And so I was answering this based on my knowledge, and then the more I answered, the more research I did, and the more I found more information, and this started to accumulate, and I realized that a lot of the information I didn't know before. So I started to accumulate more and more information, and eventually friends and colleagues said, well, you have all this information, why don't you publish it in a book? And so I took it seriously and I wrote a book about it. But I actually put off writing the book until I actually went back to Palestine in 2008 and started practicing it, because I don't like to write about things that I don't practice. So I engaged in popular resistance, which gave me a better understanding of what's going on. And I was actually arrested also many times between 2008 or after 2008. So this first-hand experience plus the historical reading of what happened is what I summarized in the book.
The mass nonviolent uprising by Palestinians in 1987 is usually called the First Intifada. Are there earlier examples of Palestinian civil resistance?
Yes, as I was researching our own history, which is not taught to us in schools, unfortunately, even Palestinian schools, even when they had some control over the school curriculum, they did not include real history of Palestine. It includes a history that is doctored, if you want, towards the colonizers. So when I researched it, I found so much more information than I knew myself, and that I was trying to relate to other people and explain to them. I found out that actually we had a very long history, beginning with the first uprising, which was not 1987, but was more like 1881. Right after the first Zionist colonies in Palestine, Petah Tikva and Rishon LeZion, came in with the idea of transforming a multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious society and making it into a Jewish state of Israel. This initial idea of Zionism that came in the late 19th century and that resulted in colonization of Palestine had basically a reaction to it as an uprising, and this uprising was successful at the time of the Ottoman Empire and changed the policies of the Ottoman Empire. And then it was followed by 13 other uprisings, including uprisings, for example, in 1904, in 1921, 1929, 1936, and so on. These uprisings have all accomplished significant achievements. And if nothing else, the delay in the Zionist project that occurred as a result of this allowed people to continue to exist there. And I may venture to say that I myself would probably not be here today, would not have been born even, or would be born in a refugee camp in Lebanon or Syria if it was not for the resistance and the persistence and the resilience of my grandparents and great-grandparents.
Can you talk about the role of the nonviolent BDS movement in gaining human rights and democracy for all in Israel and Palestine?
Yes, boycott, divestment, and sanctions is one of the tools, one of the many forms of of course, popular resistance that people could engage in. And in this case, also people from outside the country could engage in helping us with BDS. And it was an important tool that was used in South Africa, for example, against apartheid, and helped in the struggle against apartheid. So I believe it's an important process. As far as its success, of course, Palestinians engaged in BDS going back to the late 19th century and early 20th century, and I have some documents about this in my book. But the real acceleration happened after 2005, when Palestinian civil society issued a call for BDS. This call, which was signed initially by 170 Palestinian non-governmental organizations, civil society associations, etc. And this call was picked up very quickly and really mushroomed in the past 13 years since it was issued in 2005. And I would dare to say that it was actually more successful and grew faster than what happened in South Africa, because the first call for BDS in South Africa was 1955, and it really accelerated in the late 70s, early 80s. In our case, it certainly accelerated the past 13 years, much more. And the reason for that is there's also internet now and connectivity of the world and social media and so forth that helps us, which didn't exist at the time of the South African apartheid struggle. So I think it has been very successful. The best evidence of its success is actually how paranoid the Zionist state, the Israeli state, have become about it. And in fact, they talk about it all the time, incessantly actually, in their annual Herzliya conference, where the elites gather to discuss how to promote more colonialism and how to grow more at the expense of the native Palestinians. They talk about two main threats actually. The one threat is the BDS, and the second is the demographics, being the Palestinian reproduction rate. That is what to do with all these Palestinians, if you want. And those are the two main threats, actually, ahead of, let's say, the threats from Iran or Hezbollah or Hamas or any of the other supposed threats to the State of Israel.
Do all sectors of Palestinian civil society support the BDS movement?
I mean, in the case of South Africa, under apartheid, the Western governments were supportive of apartheid. And that is why civil society in South Africa and civil society outside of South Africa was mobilized, because their governments were not mobilized. And in the case of Palestine, as mentioned in 2005, 170 organizations and civil society groups signed on to this, and now there are literally thousands. In fact, it is a consensus basically across the board, across the political spectrum, and whatever differences exist in Palestinian political structure, whether religious people, communists, socialists, atheists, etc., they all support the BDS movement. It's across the board. Now, this does not mean that there's no Palestinians who are impeding the BDS movement. And in my research, I found that the Oslo Accords and the people who are now profiting from the Oslo Accord, being the Palestinian Authority figures, if you want, or politicians, who've based their careers and their salaries on the continuation of a quasi, military occupation / limited self-authority or governance by the Palestinians, who want this perpetuated, that are impeding, whether knowingly or unknowingly, they are impeding the BDS movement. I would say in the same way that Chief Buthelezi, head of Zululand during apartheid, was a big impediment to the development of BDS, because he was claiming that there is not that big of a problem of apartheid that it is a problem that is just a matter of getting together and working with the occupier. So I think this is why I believe it is important that civil society acts, because governments are not going to act. And in our case also the Palestinian Authority is not acting enough, obviously, against the occupiers, against the colonizers. So we in the civil society must act.
How do you maintain hope for a future of human rights and democracy for all Palestinians and Israeli Jews?
Well, I mean, for many people who act, and there are thousands of us and hundreds of thousands probably that are very, very active in the struggle, we draw inspiration from the world, basically, and from examples in history of people that preceded us and that sacrificed, certainly much more than I have sacrificed. Some people are injured, some people are killed, lose limbs, who are participating in ways because they envision a better future and they work for this future. So we draw the inspiration from these people, and we say that, as Arundhati Roy once said, there is a better future coming. On a quiet night, I can hear her steps. So we really need to think positively about the future. I guess partly because you don't have a choice. I mean, you either think positively and do what you do, or you give up and might commit suicide or something. No, you need to act. You need to be comfortable in your own skin. I would say that's the most important thing. And as long as I'm comfortable in my own skin, that I'm doing what I think is right, to me that is actually happiness. Happiness is not having no physical hardships or walls or checkpoints or any of this stuff. Happiness is when you are comfortable that you are doing the right thing, and that you see a better future, and that you invite everybody to come into that future, including our enemies. I think when we liberate ourselves as Palestinians, when we have freedom, the Israelis, the Zionists even, will have freedom from being repressors, from being occupiers, from being, psychologically traumatized, having to kill us, basically. Because that's the only way they can steal our land, is to kill us. So I think that's where I draw inspiration.